Have you ever felt anxious about being anxious? Sounds crazy, right? But this is the reality for many people. The problem is not anxiety itself, but how you deal with it. If you think you need to eliminate anxiety, I'll show you why that approach is hurting you. Get ready to change your perspective and finally stop feeling anxious about anxiety. But before anything else, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future content that will transform the way you think. Anxiety. Just hearing that word makes many people's hearts race, doesn't it? But let's take it easy. Anxiety is not the villain everyone paints it to be. It's a natural emotion, a way for our body to alert us. It's like that friend who sometimes overdoes it but is always there to remind you of important things. Ignoring anxiety is like ignoring a blinking red traffic light. It's not there to harm you, but to protect you. Let's think for a moment. If you're about to give a presentation at work or try something new, the butterflies in your stomach appear. Have you noticed how that makes you more alert? In this context, anxiety is there to keep you prepared, like a psychological shield. Imagine if you felt absolutely nothing. You'd likely miss crucial moments in your life. So instead of seeing anxiety as a stumbling block, view it as that warning light that alerts you to dangers ahead. The problem today is that many people treat anxiety as a disease. The rush to the doctor in hopes of a quick fix is common. Society, too, is quick to label any discomfort as a problem that needs an immediate cure. But what if, instead of trying to eliminate anxiety with pills and diagnoses, we started paying more attention to what it's trying to tell us? That's where the key lies. Imagine your mind is like a big ship sailing through choppy waters. The captain, representing your logical side, is in charge. But who really knows the depths of the sea? The crew, your emotions. When you ignore this crew, the ship begins to lose direction. And what happens? Anxiety increases. So instead of trying to silence the crew's voice, or your emotions, it's better to listen to what they have to say. Let's be honest, anxiety can be uncomfortable, but it's part of life. The key is changing how you see it. Start seeing it as a guide, not an enemy. There are 3 strategies you can apply to deal with it. First, stop treating anxiety as a disease. Second, listen to your emotions. They have more to say than you think. And lastly, be kinder to yourself. You don't need to fight anxiety all the time. By accepting that anxiety is part of your journey, you begin to gain more control over it. It's not about eliminating it, but learning to dance with it. When you stop trying to beat anxiety and start working alongside it, you'll notice its influence fading. And just like that, it stops being that 7-headed monster and becomes a tool in your self-awareness process. During today's video, besides the main topics, I'd like to share something that made a difference for me. Recently, I started using CineBoost, which has helped me improve focus, energy, and even reduce anxiety in my day-to-day life. If you're interested in learning more, check out the pinned comment. And the best part is, you only pay for the shipping. In addition to being a natural alarm, anxiety plays a crucial role in our lives. It acts as a subtle reminder, or sometimes not so subtle, that there's something to be done. If you think about a big event coming up, like an exam or an interview, anxiety is there to keep you alert and prepared. It's your personal assistant, letting you know that tasks are on the radar and need your attention. Have you noticed that when we ignore these feelings, things tend to go off track? The idea of completely eliminating anxiety from life might initially seem like a dream. But would that really be healthy? Think about it. If you didn't have that little bit of anxiety before a challenging situation, you'd probably approach it carelessly, without the necessary focus. Anxiety works as a reminder that there are risks and opportunities. And let's be real, who hasn't prepared better because of that slight discomfort in the pit of their stomach? Now, a classic example, when someone is about to fly. That slight nervousness before the flight, which many interpret as something negative, is actually helping the person check if everything is ready. Passport? Check. Luggage? All set. Without that small dose of anxiety, you risk forgetting something important. In other words, anxiety keeps us more alert, ready for any eventuality. If we completely eliminated anxiety from our lives, we would become less functional. People could miss deadlines, ignore responsibilities, and ultimately become less aware of life's challenges. The balance here is essential. Feeling too much anxiety can paralyze you, but feeling none can leave you unprepared. The right amount of this emotion might be exactly what you need to stay at the top of your game. Imagine an elite athlete before a big competition. The anxiety they feel before entering the field is what puts them in the ideal mental state to achieve their best performance. Without it, they wouldn't feel the pressure and need to give their all. So, instead of treating anxiety as a negative force, why not use it as fuel for your projects and challenges? Believe me, it can be your ally if used wisely. The big question, however, is learning to channel this anxiety constructively. When anxiety appears, instead of trying to ignore or suppress it, try to understand it. What is it trying to tell you? Is there something that needs your attention? Use this feeling as a guide, a counselor that's there to show you the way. Over time, you'll see that instead of being a burden, anxiety can be the force that propels you forward. As we understand the importance of anxiety, we begin to accept that it is part of personal growth. And there's no way to grow without facing challenges, right? Now that you know anxiety is here to help, it becomes easier to work alongside it. And speaking of work, the next point we'll explore is a critical take on how anxiety is addressed in the health field. Let's dive in. The way anxiety is treated nowadays often leaves much to be desired. When someone goes to the doctor seeking help to deal with anxiety, the solution offered is often the quickest and most convenient: medication. And that's not just the doctor's fault, but also the healthcare system itself, which doesn't provide enough time to truly listen to what's going on with the patient. After all, in quick consultations, it's much easier to prescribe a pill than to dive deep into the emotional roots of the problem. Of course, in some cases, medication is necessary and can be a real relief for those suffering from incapacitating levels of anxiety. However, the problem arises when this becomes the first and only solution. How many times has someone gone to the doctor's office and walked out with a prescription without having had the chance to truly discuss their emotions? This creates a dependency where people believe the only way to control anxiety is through pills. But what if, instead of looking at anxiety as something bad that needs to be suppressed, we started trying to understand what it's trying to tell us? Medications can help mask symptoms temporarily, but they don't solve what's behind it all. The lack of time and depth in consultations leads to a quick fix, and many get stuck in this cycle. In the end, this can even perpetuate anxiety, because the root of the problem remains unaddressed. Let's be honest. Have you ever left a doctor's appointment feeling like you weren't truly heard? This happens to a lot of people. The problem is that the current approach to mental health in many places is still very mechanical. There's a disconnect between what people really need and what's being offered. The ideal scenario would be one where people could explore their emotions instead of simply seeking immediate relief. The rush to solve anxiety with pills ignores the fact that emotions need to be experienced and processed. This leads us to reflect: are we putting too much faith in quick fixes and neglecting the importance of addressing emotions in a deeper way? Sure, changing habits and working on the mind takes time, and the journey can be longer than taking a pill, but the result is much more lasting. True transformation comes from within, from understanding what makes us anxious, instead of just looking for the off button. So, it's time to rethink the approach to mental health. Yes, in some cases, medication has its place, but it shouldn't be the only option. The focus needs to be on the root of the problem, not just the symptoms. This means listening more, giving people more time, and most importantly, encouraging them to look inward. If you've experienced this, maybe it's time to seek alternatives that go beyond just medication. Now that we understand the limitations of this medical approach, it makes sense to explore other ways of dealing with anxiety. And this is where a powerful metaphor comes in: the ship. How do we deal with the emotional crew we all carry? That's going to be the topic of our next section, so get ready for an analogy that might change your perspective on how to manage your mind. Imagine that the human mind is like a big ship navigating through the seas of life. In command, we have the captain, who represents your logical, rational, and calculating side. The captain makes decisions based on concrete information and always seeks the safest route. But the captain isn't sailing alone. Below deck, there's an entire crew of emotions, instincts, and sensations. And this is where it gets interesting. If the captain ignores the crew, the ship risks going off course because, even though the captain has the final say, it's the crew that keeps the ship running. Now, think about a time when you tried to ignore your emotions, focusing only on the rational side. What happened? Probably the crew started to stir. When emotions are ignored, they don't disappear. On the contrary, they get louder, demanding attention. The captain may try to muffle these voices, but eventually the pressure builds up, and that's when anxiety grows. The ship metaphor shows us that if we want to maintain stability, we need to listen to what the emotional crew has to say. Let's put this into practice. Imagine you're making an important decision in your life, like changing jobs. Your rational side, the captain, might be trying to calculate risks and rewards in a cold and objective way. But meanwhile, your emotions are trying to alert you to things that logic doesn't catch. The impact this change might have on your well-being, your relationships, and your personal satisfaction. If the captain ignores these signals, the result could be a decision that seems correct on paper, but leaves you unhappy in the long run. It's interesting to note that the captain, reason, and the crew, emotions, are not at war. They're on the same team. The key is for the captain to learn how to listen to the crew. Likewise, your emotions shouldn't take complete control of the ship, because that would lead to impulsive and poorly thought-out decisions. The balance between logic and emotion is what keeps the ship on the right course, safely navigating the stormy seas of life. When people ignore their emotions for too long, it can lead to sudden bursts of anxiety. The crew, which has been silent for too long, ends up shouting even louder to be heard. But if the captain starts paying attention to these voices from the beginning, they can prevent the ship from being tossed around by emotional storms. In other words, learning to have a dialogue with your emotions is a powerful way to reduce anxiety's impact on your daily life. Just like a ship needs regular maintenance to keep sailing, our mind also requires constant care. This means stopping from time to time to evaluate how we're feeling, what our emotions are trying to tell us, and how we can adjust our course. The ship metaphor reminds us that our emotional and mental health requires attention and continuous internal dialogue. Ignoring these signals only makes the waters rougher. With this in mind, now that we understand how our mind works like a ship, it's time to talk about how we can change our perspective on anxiety. After all, it's possible to see it in a completely different way if we know how. Let's dive into these strategies in the next topic. Changing the way we see anxiety can be transformative. When we stop viewing anxiety as a disease, something to be fought at all costs, and start seeing it as a natural and necessary emotion, the burden lightens. Think about it. Instead of trying to cure your anxiety, how about learning to work with it? This shift in perspective can be the first step toward regaining control. Instead of rushing to eliminate any sign of discomfort, how about pausing, breathing, and asking yourself, what is my anxiety trying to tell me? This leads to the first strategy. Stop treating anxiety as a pathology. This doesn't mean ignoring it, but rather understanding that it's not the villain. See anxiety as a partner in your journey, a compass that can guide you to make more conscious decisions. When you accept that anxiety is part of life, it loses much of its power over you. This simple mental adjustment already brings an immediate sense of relief. The second point is to listen to your emotions. Many times, anxiety is screaming something important. It might be a reminder that there's a situation that needs attention, or perhaps a sign that something is out of balance. Ignoring your emotions will only increase their intensity. A practical example: if you're anxious about a work meeting, instead of drowning in worry, ask yourself what this anxiety is telling you. Maybe it's a warning that you need to prepare more, or that there's something unresolved there. Another powerful strategy is to treat yourself with more kindness. How often do we criticize ourselves for feeling anxious, as if it were a sign of weakness? But in reality, this self-criticism only makes the situation worse. Practice self-compassion. Instead of punishing yourself for feeling anxious, try to calm down. Giving yourself space to breathe and acknowledging your feelings can completely change the way you handle emotional challenges. A simple act of kindness toward yourself can reduce the intensity of anxiety on many levels. Finally, understand that accepting anxiety as part of life does not mean surrendering to it. In this case, acceptance means that you acknowledge its presence but don't let it control you. When you work alongside anxiety instead of against it, you start seeing opportunities where before there were only obstacles. This might seem counterintuitive, but accepting anxiety is one of the most effective ways to diminish its impact. This shift in perspective is a practice that takes time, but it's worth it. The more you adopt these strategies, the more you'll see that anxiety isn't a monster to be defeated, but rather a valuable part of your emotional life. And like any other emotion, it can be managed with the right tools. Now that you understand how to transform your relationship with anxiety, let's move on to the final point: acceptance as the key to all of this. Acceptance is the key that many people forget to use when it comes to anxiety. Accepting that anxiety is part of life is the first step toward reducing its impact. Instead of fighting it all the time, as if it were an enemy to be defeated, why not work with it? When you resist anxiety, you're actually feeding it. The simple act of accepting that it exists, that it's a valid and natural emotion, already eases part of the burden. Resistance creates tension, and tension, in turn, only increases the discomfort. A practical example: you're about to give an important speech, and you feel the famous butterflies in your stomach. Accepting that this anxiety is there for a reason, that it's a normal response to a challenging situation, already changes your posture. Instead of trying to suppress the nervousness, you can use it to your advantage by paying more attention to details and preparing better. Acceptance turns discomfort into something manageable rather than an insurmountable obstacle. Working with anxiety instead of against it is like learning to surf. When you accept that the waves are there and that they're part of the ocean, you can learn to use them to move forward. But if you try to fight the waves, you'll end up exhausted and stuck in the same place. Anxiety works the same way. Accepting that it will appear at certain moments in life and that you can surf these waves gives you much more control than trying to resist everything it brings. Acceptance also means being kind to yourself. Often, we have the expectation that we must be invincible, never feel fear or anxiety. But that's simply impossible. Everyone feels anxiety at some point, and that's okay. The key is to stop being so hard on yourself. When you allow yourself to feel anxiety without criticizing yourself, it loses its power. It's like taking away the fuel that feeds it. This self-kindness is an act of self-compassion that makes the journey much easier. And of course, acceptance doesn't mean giving up. Accepting anxiety is just the beginning. From there, you can work to manage it more effectively. This includes learning breathing techniques, mindfulness practices, or even planning strategies that help reduce anxiety triggers. By accepting anxiety as part of your path, you better prepare yourself to deal with it when it appears, without it becoming an uncontrollable monster. Finally, by accepting anxiety, you begin to see that it plays an important role in your life. It's not here to sabotage you, but to alert you to challenges, risks, and opportunities. Accepting anxiety is accepting yourself, with all your emotions and complexities. And this act of acceptance opens the doors to a more balanced life, where you can navigate the highs and lows with greater ease. Now that we understand that acceptance is the key to dealing with anxiety, we can focus on how to apply all this knowledge in everyday life. After all, what can you do to start this journey? Let's move on to the next steps and put these ideas into practice. Now that you've learned how to better manage anxiety, don't stop here. The next video will delve even deeper into this topic, so be sure to watch it. Also, I wanted to share that I've been using Cineboost, which has helped me focus, increase energy, and reduce anxiety in my daily life. If you want to know more, check out the pinned comment. And the best part is, you only pay for shipping. Oh, and of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any content that could change your life.